I decided to unite the yesterday lecture with today's. In mathematics, my report was connected with the publication of fundamental work. It is called Theories and Strategies of Establishing Multipolar World Order on the Basis of Partnership of the Leading Powers. It's Yalta Piece 2. It's a fundamental work. It has two parts. It has about 1,500 pages, if I'm not mistaken, and it is created of several reports by Yalta Club. There were 5 reports in the book and 2 more materials connected with the big Eurasian partnership, which are also connected with the big Eurasian partnership. And the first material is by Yurievich, dedicated to the theory of civilization's development. It's a fundamental work connected with the theory of civilization's development and implication to the modern times. It so happened that I took an active part in the editing of those materials, so I plunged deep enough into a big volume of data. The first part was created by Yurievich during the last decade, and he dedicated a lot of his creative time to that. And because of that, I have some ideas which I would like to share with you, together with the presentation of this work. There comes a question. The world order on the basis of partnership of civilization and Yalta Piece 2. There is a certain cognitive dissonance here. Why? Because partnership of civilizations and civilization by itself, it's a process, it's a category of long-term action which takes thousands of years, or at least hundreds of years. But Yalta Peace is though an important event in history, but its effect has only been lasting for the last decades. Because if it would have been longer, we would not speak about Yalta Piece 2, but Yalta Piece 1 would be continuing. So, but this category, Yalta Piece, which is speaking about the end of the World War II and all the events connected with that, the peaceful agreement and the end of siege. There were many episodes like that in the history of mankind, but this event is nearly equal to the life of civilizations, which takes thousands of years. So why is it possible? If we look at this diagram, this is a spiral of civilization's development by Yurievich, and we see the generations of civilizations, and we can see that they are taking hundreds and thousands of years. But this spiral is narrowing in time. I would like to comment that by my big background, is specializing in physics and mathematics. That is why I am interested in numbers relationship, which is proving the humanitarian ideas. And I made a simple experiment here. I created this relationship and I tried to find out what mathematical relationship describes this narrowing. And it turned out on the right diagram that it's a simple relationship on the specific scale. It's an inverse number of the length of the period, which is occupied by the corresponding generation in the civilization. And on the ordinate scale, it's the beginning of the civilization, and in these coordinates there is a linear relationship, and it's 0.99, so it's practically 1, and it's not just a coincidence, it's a law, and in many coordinate hyperbole. So the process of speeding up, which is described with growing speed, and this hyperbole goes into infinity at a certain point, and the singularity, this coming into infinity, it's the year 2100. So it's pretty close to us. Maybe it's a coincidence, and maybe not. And I will speak more quickly. In fact, these questions of singularity, the speeding up of the human history, has been described pretty long ago. It's Modis, it's Alexander Pavlov, and they also use similar technologies to calculate this in different countries at different kinds of times, independently from each other. And they have similar, and they get similar results. The history is squeezing up, the quality changes come more and more often, and they are described with hyperbole, and those acute moments Tarkovsky sees from the point of view of the technological changes in 1945. For Panov it has already been passed in 2004, and if we there might be an artifact. What is changes in history? It's something very subjective, but there are very specific things which can be calculated. Here we are speaking about the population of the Earth, starting from the year 3000 before Christ and up to now. It's also a hyperbole, and we can see the difference, and the acute moment will come in 6 years. In fact, the population of population, to make a forecast, should become infinite in 2026, and if we prolong the diagram for 20 years, for 20,000 years, I have already calculated that we will get this picture. And we may ask a question. If different sources give the same forecast, then something should happen in the nearest decade, or maybe 15 years. Something should change in such a dramatic way that it will get out beyond the framework of the previous history of mankind. This is what mathematicians are saying to us. Above you see the population of cities, the urban population. The changes is coordinated by the technological progress, and on the ordinate scale, it's a logarithmic scale, so it's growing 1,000 times, and we see the similar picture, but it goes in steps. I will not speak in detail. These are the periods of technological revolutions. The first is the Bronze Age, the transition from Neolithic Age to Bronze Age. The second step is the mass acquisition of iron tools, and the last step is the capitalist period, when we replaced manual manufacturing with machines. So we are in the end of the last period. Why I'm speaking about the end? Why everything should transit into a new quality. First of all, the Earth cannot bear this infinite overpopulation on the one hand, and on the other hand, we also show here the growth of the population of Earth throughout the history of mankind. This rate was always growing. At the beginning it was very small, but then it grew up, and in 1960s the trend has changed dramatically, and now the population is going down, and by the end of this century the demography forecast stabilization of the population, and this has never happened before. It happened, but it was there were some special events, and there is also a version that the population will drop up to 5 billion and even to 3 billion or even to 1 billion from the current 8 billion. So it's something we have never seen before. So something is going on. We are living in the period of global changes, and in this rush of our times we sometimes think that everything that is going on now has already happened, and humankind has been living for not so long, but when you look at all these numbers, you get a bit anxious. So what's the conclusion? The globalization, the changes that have been going and have been increasing the population is over. We are starting the period of stabilization and drop. It's a unique event, and secondly, each technological revolution increased local globalization, starting from controlling the small territory for the tribes, and then tribes united into states and occupied bigger territories and could control bigger territories. Later on we had empires. Many countries were included in one state, and now, during the capitalism, the final stage, the whole world has become global, has become unified, because our transport technologies conditionally help us very quickly to transit in the space, and we can connect with any person on the other end of the globe, and it's a core change, and this should have a very important influence on the further history of mankind. The world has become closed within itself. There were some regions which we could open and exploit, and now everything is already opened. So what will happen because of that? The stages of globalization, which I described here, at the beginning, there is a scheme upwards. There are separate social organisms, then they gather together in search of safety, and for example the League of Nations and the United Nations are the institutions which help to coordinate the policy for the safety, and then we united from the economical point of view, and the next stage is when we unify with each other, when we see everybody as the same, and when we see animals as if we see each other as relatives. Animals don't do that. At the last stage, we are perceiving each other as our relatives and we are trusting each other, but this should happen on the basis of new ideology. And at the age of linear time, such unifying ideology for the Roman Empire became Christianity, which broke the social and ethnical barriers between the human beings, and everybody became brothers and they could trust each other instead of competition. On the left we can see the competition with everybody and what will happen later on, and it will happen very quickly, as you have seen from the experience of the development of fundamental characteristics of the evolution of the mankind. It looks like a map without boundaries. We have only external boundaries, but the internal boundaries are not used here. So we will have administrative boundaries. But isn't it a utopia? It's not, because such processes have always happened. For example, this is the map of France in 12th century. There are lots of boundaries, there are small territories which are fighting with each other, there are ethnical wars, and the next map is France during the French Revolution. The boundaries are there, but they are administrative. They look very much like something in the 13th century, but they are administrative. So the notion of a French person became more important than the notion of a person from Provence, from Britain, and so on. So they had unified laws, financial systems, transport and economy connections. So everybody were distributed arms. Before that would not be possible, because why should you arm your neighbor who is your enemy? And here they started to make people responsible for fighting and for protecting their common boundary. So it has already happened. And this will happen in the future. But it's hard to perceive for us, because we are at the moment at a very unfortunate moment when the internal contradictions are becoming more and more acute, and Eurasian alliance and BRICS and the European continent, they all are becoming enemies to each other. We are becoming aliens, and Russians are different from everybody else, and we are perceived as enemies. And if we look into the future, what imperative things will happen? As I have said, globalization has already happened, the world has become closed in itself, and the main issue here is that the play with the positive sum, which was led by the Western world, it will change, and it is already changes. And when we are transiting from the positive sum to zero sum, the income is destroyed. So the Western world is based on the profit, and it's the engine of the Western world. And if there is no profit, then it's a very different principle of state governance. And so the capitalism has hanged himself. So the stabilization of population and transition to informational society, the artificial intellect will depend, and the humankind will trust some decisions to computers, and singularity has never happened before. We are creating new arms, we are increasing the quality of production, and the quantity of people also grew up, and today we are witnessing something very different. We are using chips, we are using artificial organs, we are using cyborgs, and we are changing our conscience. We used to change the consciousness, but this was something esoteric, but now it is on a mass scale through the internet. And this is really scary because we don't have any experience in living in such a world. And the transformation is inevitable. We are going from capitalism to the distributional society. The main value will be not the payment, but information. Why? Because payments we can provide for everybody during the machine production, but the change of your consciousness, the information will be changed in the world. And we will digitalize the whole life, and the demographic structure will change. We will have a lot of elderly people and very few young people. The age of the population will be growing, and it's a dramatic change. The structure of the society was always, the demographic scheme was triangular. When the life expectancy up to the 19th century was 35 years, then it was prolonged to 40 years, and now it's 80 years. Just during 1 century we doubled it, and it will continue growing. So the weight of old people will be increasing, and this will be not the society of growth, this will be the society of getting old. And we will depend on the technologies, information technologies, and we were speaking about the problems of education. And now the young people probably don't need this education as much as we did, because in the past you had to learn to take decisions, but now the decisions will be taken by computers, and this is very dangerous. The network society, when everybody will be connected with everybody, we used to use mediators, and we will increase the ideology, and we don't know what kind of ideology there will be, but it will define the society. The ways of development, there are two alternatives. The first way is a totalitarian society. Everything that I have said is, well, those of you who have seen the movie by Georgi Daneli Kinzanza, you understand what I'm speaking about. These are stratas in the society, these are very strict rules, this is a distributional system without any competitiveness, so the competitiveness is destroyed, you have no any freedom of self-expression, and you have to stay at the same place, and you are controlled when you cannot leave your place. And there are many conspiracy theories which are saying that this is already happening. At least there are some forces in the modern world which are already going in trying to implement this. But few people are speaking about the second theory. That's a world as an organism. It's a mutual connection, and there are social roles, but they are not competing with each other, but they are cooperative. Like in an organism, the heart is different from the kidneys, but they are not fighting each other, and kidney disease is a disease of the whole organism, and those parts of the organism which are proclaiming total freedom are destroying the whole organism. What is cancer? These are cells that don't want to obey the common rules, and this brings the whole organism to its death. And this is inevitable. We cannot go back. And because of this, there comes a question. We are going into a deadlock. Who is the actor today? The main actors today are not the states, or countries. But who is the main actor? The civilization. And in this sense, Yurievich is penetratious. So people are traveling around the world in a free way, but traveling around the world, they are passing through the boundaries, but how do they associate themselves? On the basis of the civilization. So a Muslim in Paris will remain a Muslim, and he will probably call himself a French person. But for him, the most important thing will be still that he is a Muslim, not that he is a French. And being a Muslim means that he belongs to the Islamic civilization. That is why the actor is changing. And if we are discussing the situation in Russia, who is fighting against us, it's a unified, generalized West. Not the British, not the Americans, but the generalized West. Why? Because we are fought not as Russia, but as a separate civilization. The same is happening in China, and we should find new terms, new theory of society corresponding to the new age. And in many ways, in our terms and notions, we are living in the past, and our manuals should be rewritten. And this work, these 2 volumes about which I spoke at the beginning, this is a fundamental work which has been written in a new paradigm. This is the content, but let us just go on, because we are limited in time. I recommend to everybody, when this work is published, it should be published by the end of this year. Please read it. It will be available via the internet, and you will find there your articles and maybe your thoughts, because it's a collective work. And the 7th chapter is called the Scientific Platform, the conferences of the permanent members of the Security Council of the United Nations. And there is a dissonance here. If we're speaking about the fight of civilization, then why we're speaking about the leaders of the permanent members of the Council, Security Council? They are representatives of states. They are not representatives of civilizations. There are 3 civilizations here. They're France and the USA, and represent the West, the Russian civilization, and China. But we should. But there is an accent on the leaders of the states. So this is a closer analysis of what has happened in the last 200 years. The dynamics, what I'm talking about is a result of work which was performed in the Moscow State University about the forecasts of the world dynamics, and the models and analysis which I described in a very brief and squeezed way. But what are the new ideas or the economical and practical dynamics? We are providing long-term forecasts, and now we have a shorter period. The first 22 in the 19th century we had 22. Great Britain was the leader. The second half of the 19th century they were as a dominant, and everybody wanted to be like Britain. And later on, and the third cycle, the first third of the 20th century is the fight when the dominant became weaker and they started to revise the world. There are two world wars. The next cycle, when the USA won the war and they became the leaders, then the next period is the end of this domination. Nobody likes the Americans anymore, but we are still subordinate to them. And the next period, the forecasted period, is again, if we look at the similar situations, there were two world wars, and now we have ideological, economical war. And this period is just starting. And if we are speaking from this point of view in a more clear way, it's the Fourth World War, World War IV. We know about World War I, World War II. The World War III was the Cold War, which the Soviet Union lost. And now we have a hybrid war. Most probably there will be no guns. At the moment, the shooting in Armenia, in Nagorno-Karabakh, but between the main actors, this will be the war for the minds. This will be headhunting. And I have already shown you the graphics of the global society. We should become a global society of a new type. It's a singular society. And it will happen in 2026. The stable population will change. And what will be the stages, what kinds of scenarios we can see here? The first scenario is the fight of the existing leaders. The Western world will fight in order to keep their leadership. The second scenario is chaos and conflicts. The third scenario is a fight and cooperation of civilizations. And the fourth scenario is the future world, which is starting to evolve right here, right now, but we don't understand it at the moment. And it will be a global world, and it will be either a united organism or a totalitarian society. And all these scenarios are going on at the same time, and we can see them here. They're not linear. The most intensive scenario at the moment is the effort of the Western world to keep their position. Then there will be chaos. The third scenario is regional and fight for and cooperation of civilizations. And by the end of this century, if again we orient on singularity, then probably not by the end of the century, there should be created a new civilization. What should Russia do in such a situation? And we have also discussed it many times already. So there are four scenarios. They are all going on at the same time. But the strategies in each scenario are different. And in the first scenario and in the second scenario, these are scenarios of keeping to the post, of keeping the balance of Russia in the conditions when it is attacked. And here the normal arm is patriotism and consolidation of society, but patriotism cannot solve the problems at the next stage, because patriotism is always is working by being more proud about yourself and being ignorant about the others, but we need to come to the system where everybody is trustworthy and everybody is perceived as your relative. And the next scenario is the cooperation of civilizations, and here Russia is perceived as a civilization, and here we can progress in a partnership or care about ourselves. And the fourth scenario is the future. It will be either the totalitarian scenario or it will be a unified organism, bifurcation again. And coming back to Yalta Peace 2, what is the task of Yalta Peace 2 at the moment? In fact, it's very simple. If we are speaking about the global dynamics, we need to go through the second scenario with as little losses as possible and get to the scenario, the third scenario of the partnership, world in partnership, and we need to make those countries who are included into the Security Council. And we don't have any countries who are in the Security Council who belong to our civilization. And there are prevailing the countries who want to realize scenario number one, and we should make them try to keep up balance and not to allow the war to happen, and to avoid it and to prevent it and to drive to the route of the third scenario, and this is the cooperation of civilizations on the basis of partnership. But to successfully transit to scenario 4 and to create a world as a unified organism, we need some new ideology. Each civilization is trying to keep up their values prevailing over others, but on this basis you cannot create a unified organism. We need some new ideas which will be higher, which will have high priority. We need the new ideology. So like in Christianity, there are no slaves and no slave owners, there are no others, everybody is brothers, and there are certain approaches in our book, but this theme has not been developed because it's really quite complex, but we are very short of time. Who will be the first to propose the new ideology? It's not even ideology, it's probably new ethics, which will allow all the civilizations and which will not contradict with the values of all the civilizations, and which will allow them to cooperate peacefully. And the country the civilization who will introduce this new ethics will be a wise man. And the role of this person of the social organism will be invaluable. I'm deeply convinced that Russian science has the largest chance to formulate the new science of societies based on the necessity to transit to a completely new stage, and we have the richest experience in our history. We are not East, we are not West, we are the only country who managed to survive in between, and we understand both West and East. And the main issue that we have had some very tough experiences in going after the West and in getting under the influence of the Eastern technologies in strict totalitarianism. And I would like to call all those who are present here, all those who are interested in mathematics, not to stop here at these 2 volumes and to create some new initiative work group and to go on with this work, to create new society, science, and on the basis of our Russian approach, which may become alternative and which may bring the humankind to the right way. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, I am ready to answer them. Yes, please. One question. Today we are facing the situation when the developed countries with high income are going into one direction and all the rest are going into another direction. What do you think about it? All the countries are developing in different ways. How can they go together? I said that this is called the world as a unified organism. There are different organs and they have very different functions. The question is, your question is not very correct because you are thinking about different levels of income. In the framework of the world where we are living, if you are developed, this means that you have high GDP per capita. But in fact, a person doesn't need much to be happy. The happiest countries are not Japan and not the USA, but Vanuatu. And I agree with you. We are not there yet. I agree with you, certainly. But if we look at how much the Americans consume, that's why the system, world as a unified organism, is a system of self-restrictions. Let's remember the Christian commandments: don't steal, don't kill, don't commit adultery. So it's always self-restrictions. And people feel okay with it. If they don't steal, do they feel bad? No, they okay. We are still in the old habits and something that was formed 70 years ago, of course. So now we need a new way. Yes, we need new ideology, we need new society science, we need a new approach to the perceiving of the mechanisms of the society movements. And the world was material during the last 2 centuries. Before that, people didn't think about money. They were thinking about whether they will get to the heaven or not. And their main priority was the morale. And so I don't want to say that this is bad or good. Just people are changing their mind and they will think in another way. It's a very interesting scientific research and you should in all ways to go on with it. Let us work together. So we will need the continuation. Otherwise, there will be no future. Yes, we are at the stage where we can get to Kinshasa. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Thank you very much. I probably have taken too much time. Thank you very much for your attention. And we'll go on with our agenda. The next report will be by Kirill Astapov. Transformation of the financial credit system in the multipolar world. Please, you're welcome. Dear members of the Yalta Congress, I would like to tell you to show you my approach and to show you how the crisis of coronavirus will influence the economy, and I will speak not about a short-term influence, but about a long-term influence and the possibility to create new institutions on the basis of the United Nations. First of all, I would like to say that anti-crisis measures that are taken by the developed countries and the developing countries, they are pretty synchronized, and the countries are using more or less the same tools, but the results are very different depending on the level of economic development, the stability of the local currency, and we can see that in the short term the countries have faced very strict limitations. The manufacturers have faced strict limitations of demand and of proposal. From the point of view of manufacturing, we can see that the employees cannot work in a normal way. There are limitations on the presence of people on the premises, and some manufacturers can work remotely, but not everybody. And we spoke with the representatives of different companies, and they are saying that they cannot send people on business trips because of the transport limitations. There is the connections are destroyed, and many companies were thinking about reorient their chains of supply from the external markets to the internal markets. There are a lot of risks here, but nevertheless they are doing this even if the production may become more expensive, and there is a drop in demand, and the preferences are changing, and management structures are also changing. What Sergey has already mentioned today, when we are transiting from the liberal economy to distributional economy, but when we are limited in resources, we could see while we were on the quarantine that this liberal model is not always effective, and actually many economists were saying that we are working in the conditions similar to war, in spite of the fact that at the beginning the thesis of transition from the liberal economy to distributional, it was hard for me to accept, but now I understand that the resources are changing and the whole situation is changing. And here we see the change in the structure of production, the change in demand, and what happens, what does the government do? They provide tax redemptions, they increase public procurement with the help of budgeting, they pay to the people different cash benefits, the so-called helicopter money. And all this is not very efficient, especially if we look at monetary policy. We see that the refinancing rate has been lowered to 0.025%. In Europe, it's even lower, from 0 to minus 0.5%, and we know that the Bank of Russia is trying to gradually lower the rate. At the moment is 4.25, and here we can find ourselves in the situation where the people will not have any motivation in keeping their money, and will have a reverse effect in the economy. So what should we do? Can we use Stalin kinds of regulations? Let us speak about some global changes of the fundamental practice. I know the work by Yakovets, and it is said that a big amount of huge corporations are controlling the production all over the world. So the richest families of the country are controlling the production all over the world on the one hand, but it is nothing new in the global economy. The same happened at the beginning of the 20th century. We are just changing the platforms, and now we're speaking about Google, Yandex, and Amazon, and Sber. And those companies, despite of the fact that some of them don't even have any material resources, they're just platforms. Nevertheless, the capitalization is very high, and if we will see how the capitalization has changed since the beginning of the 20th century, a lot of companies have stayed in the list of 500 hugest companies. Most of them are in the USA. A part of oil and gas companies have gone away because of a drop in prices, and those virtual platforms have taken their place in the list of the strongest companies. What do we see? A very interesting event has happened. It's the meeting of the Anti-Monopoly Committee, and they were speaking about Amazon, Facebook, and so on. So what does it mean? It means that already the politicians understand that some companies, some platforms, unlike the previous monopolies, are not only having incredible economical power, but they are imposing new models of consuming to the society. They are controlling the minds, their potential. There are people who do not agree with them. They will be merged into those companies, and they are very aggressive. Those platforms are very aggressive, and there are very reasonable doubts and questions in the Anti-Monopoly Committee, and the committee was pretty strict with them. What can the American administration do here? And we know that they support their business, and for example, Trump is supporting the company who's paying dividends, and one of the first initiatives taken by the American administration is, guys, if you get the finance from us, there can't be anything, we are not paying back for dividends, and you can forget about our benefits. And I think that this way is it's a very sober way to do this, and this might be transferred to the national level, and it can be used in our country as well. And we are also speaking about the small companies which are still working, and we cannot expect much from them. And the current situation of crisis made people revise the existing approaches to forecasting and strategies, and what should be done here. We have at the same time said that we have many times discussed sanctions from the USA which are concerning oil and gas, defense, financial sector. And they were even speaking about excluding Russia from the SWIFT system, but I know that the Bank of Russia was thinking about replacing the SWIFT system. For example, they spoke about the possibility to work with China, and they are very consequent in their policy of working with national currencies. Probably you know that we have signed an agreement between the Central Bank and the People's Bank of China, and if we are lacking some money, the People's Bank will finance us, and we'll have a beneficiary rate. And As you know, 5-7 years ago, there was at the Moscow. In Moscow, there was launched a new project, and we worked with Turkey, with India, and this all was aimed to the possibility to refocus in our international trade. Yesterday, we had a very interesting report about BRICS and the creation of the new development bank, and they spoke about the possibility to work with national currencies, and the Bank of Development is issuing bonds, securities in national currencies, and that allows to spread them at those national markets. But in my opinion, we should go even further, because the BRICS countries is a limited number of countries, but we should make it in such a way that all the countries would be interested in creating new currency. And at the currency market, we see a unique situation. We can see that the Council of Mutual Economic Assistance is speaking about over-national currencies, but they are not working. The situation has changed dramatically. We now have digital economy, and we are speaking about digital currencies, and they are getting more and more popular, and there is a certain demand, and you should not have cash in your pocket. You should have an account in a bank. Why is it important? Because in the existing financial system, on the basis of the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the International Currency Fund, the problem is not only in the fact that there are certain quotas in voting which are distributed between the USA and other countries, but the problem is that these institutes should have a strong trust from all the countries. And the situation is very unstable, and probably we should better create a new institute on the basis of the United Nations and use a new form of money, which at the beginning may be used as a reserve of the central bank. What is the advantage of such system? In such a way we can have a national bank which will be performing emissions at the over-national level. At the first stage, we are speaking about using it as reserve. At the second stage, the state is starting to use state securities and loans in new supranational currency, and on the third stage, this can include businesses and common people, and it will be the currency in digital form. At the same time, we can use an additional tool. Maybe you have heard about it. And the operations of currency change should be taxated. And if such taxation will be used for the operations of exchange and the digital currency, and this tax will not be used for the new currency, then it will be an additional stimulus to switch to the new currency. So this transformation is not that easy to perform, because there is the World Bank and the United States institutions will not give their power that easy. But there should be some kind of consensus. We'll have to achieve it, though the United States are not interested in it. But to use BRICS currency, it's just a temporary solution, and we should probably find a supranational currency which will be used over the world. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? In fact, there are a lot of questions. As soon as we start speaking money, there are always lots of questions. Let us ask one question. I'm very much interested in what you said about China. You said that China may try to get rid of dollar, but they don't have the possibility to do that. The problem is that they have been trying to deal without a dollar for the last 15 years, maybe. I know that well because I have been studying China for the last 50 years. And as soon as China entered the World Trade Organization and after the first financial crisis of 2008, they started to try to get away from the dollar, because if you are attached to the dollar, then each world crisis will weaken your economy, and with time, China will probably succeed in that. The question is whether the Chinese market can allow itself to work independently. At the moment, they are not very much dependent on the American market, but all the other markets now will at some point depend on the Chinese production, and probably at that moment the Chinese yuan may start to play a very important role. And while we were negotiating with our Chinese partners, they always ask us to work in yuan, but at the moment the dollar was so volatile that the Chinese had to deny that, and probably the situation might turn in such a way that $1 will cost 100 rubles, and nobody in such a situation will switch their market into rubles. And the same is happening in China. When I was in China for the first time, the rate was 2.8 yuan per dollar. So the question is whether China can really perform this task, when China will be able to create such a market that they will be able to work without this attachment to the US dollar. Probably you have the idea of how much time the Chinese economy will be able to implement that task to get away from the dollar. We know that China has taken, as usual, a very untraditional way. They are using offshore yuan, and the transition from one currency to another is pretty problematic. It's a not easy deal. But I would like to say that we certainly know that they have huge golden currency reserves in China. In Russia, the central bank, who is having the main portfolio in dollars, then in the golden house, and then to yuan. Can you imagine what kind of losses will be suffered? About $1 billion. The idea is not in transitioning into yuan, but in finding a new supranational currency. And when at the moment it's a forecasting initiative, but this is something we should be thinking about and something we should offer. There's a lot to bet here, and China still has a chance to negotiate it with China. Okay. Thank you. Dear colleagues, good afternoon. First of all, I would like to appreciate the organizers of this scientific forum Yalta 2.0 and to everybody who took part in the organization. My theme is social democratic concepts concerning the modern senses, the modern human beings and humanity, and as for Yalta 1 and Yalta 2, the problem of human and humankind are the main issues. Today, in the framework of hybrid war, which is already on the way, it is first of all informational war. It's a war for senses, for the values, and in the system of values, a human being and a humankind. This is very important, softly speaking, and a human being is the highest creature, and we should fight for a person, for human being, for humankind. But where is this war going on? First of all, it's as usual in our heads, and afterwards the guns will be shooting. So my theme is theoretical, ideological. It's not easy, it's complex. Why is it not easy? Because everybody, even those who are present here, we have different points of view, and each of us has an ideology of their own, and everybody believes that they have their own truth. And is there some universal truth, the only truth? But they say that there is, but actually this question is pretty rhetoric. So the problem is even more aggravated by the fact that demographic problems can be seen in different coordinates, and if we are speaking on the vertical, if we're speaking about the vertical scale, we're speaking about large, and if we're speaking in horizontal, we're speaking about infernal things, and on the vertical axis we can speak about the movement from the past to the future, and what is today in the year 2020, the year of the 75th anniversary of the victory in World War II, and the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. And I would like to start my report with a quotation from the 20 Apostles, and they say that there are two ways. One is the way of life, and the other way of death. But nothing has. But between them there is a huge difference. They are at the different poles, and immediately we are creating a picture of ideological and political discrepancy, and the way we perceive a human being is positioned with some kind of waste, and there is also a concept of utilization of humankind, and as informational space contains this concept of human waste and the idea that humankind should be destroyed. I would like to answer to those concepts with my report. From the numerical and quantitative and qualitative points of view, the pictures are very different today. Officially, on the data of the United Nations, we have 7.4 billion people, but there is another number, 7.8 billion people, and even at this level, the quantitative assessments are different. We today were speaking about China and CIS says that there are 1 billion people, and Chinese people say that there are 1.4 billion people, but still there is a difference between the Chinese statistic and the Central Investigation Bureau. And there is Mr. Furtsev, who believes that there are 9 billion people living on the Earth and 7.4 or 9 billion. So what's going on? Happening this year, the year of COVID pandemic, the number of people is not growing, not increasing, but the planet is turning into a global abortion clinic. This is how it is positioned, because the number of abortions is going off scale, as well as the consumption of marijuana. These are official data. What else we are trying to understand? At the moment we are not yet speaking about the point of no return, when the number of births will be less than the number of deaths. But this point of no return is pretty close, and sometimes they say that it will be 2064, but using different methods of calculations we can get different results. But it's very important for us to receive not only quantitative diagrams, but we also need to understand the main senses and models. Let us first of all think about Thomas Malthus, this priest, the professor of Austin Company, who discovered the law of population, in accordance with which the population is growing exponentially, but food is growing in arithmetic progression, and this was a signal for his followers to reduce the population. The population is to blame for its growth. At the same time, we should remember that if we look from the point of view of theology, there was a commandment, multiply and replenish, and what, should we go away from this commandment, or should it stay with us? Malthus wrote, for the time before the industrialization, and then during the industrialization we received new employments, but the number of employments were less than it was necessary. And again, the population was to blame for its economical problems. And even John Maynard Keynes joined Malthus in his idea of reducing the number of people, explaining that we cannot provide dignified life to everybody. And my colleagues often ask, but how can it happen? You are speaking to increase the population. We have food problems. We know that food is not enough. And the problem of starvation is one of the global problems. And how can we work in such a way that the puzzle would work? Both the wolves have eaten much and the sheep have not been touched. But how do we look at it? There is a social problem, there is a problem in the modalities. This model is called statistics for the profit, and it's the main melody, and it's the religion of money, and if we are speaking about the religion of money, then there is only one variant, but this system is not harmonized, and our society, Yalta too, should at least know that there are alternatives to harmonized development, and there are methods to go by the way of life, not by the way of death. If we are speaking about infernal concepts that are directed to the reduction of the number of people, I always remember the monument in the state of Georgia where with the 10 Commandments. And it's interesting that in Georgia, in the same country in which the United Nations is situated, they propose to reduce the population to 500 million people. And that's very interesting. And this commandment, the humanity should not violate. The Rome Poll, which was organized on the project of Rockefeller in 1969, did not say directly about the reduction of population, but still those concepts of the Roman Club were aimed at solving the problems of population by the way of life, to solve the problems of food and starvation, and this problem is actual for about 1 billion people. And together, the testimonies and the alternatives of the time which is left, what can be offered to fight those anthropophobia concepts. In Russia we have experts who have wrote books about population. First of all, Mikhail Lomonosov. In his letter in 1761 he wrote about the maintenance and multiplying of Russian people, and he was not speaking about multiplying burgers, but he was speaking about multiplying healthy, educated people in the most harmonized system. Dmitry Anshendiev, it's another Russian expert in demography. We see a whole chapter dedicated to population, and he says that the real riches of Russia is not in the GDP, but in its population. Lomonosov wrote that vast territory without people is a waste of effort. And Barlin, Alexander Florensky, he is called the second Leonardo da Vinci, and he also wrote about the humankind, and he writes about a human being as a microcosm. And it's very important that he has vividly shown which are the limits beyond which the innovation can go, and those colliders which are being built as an international project are not from the Lord. They are speaking about some dark energy, dark materials, but when we go into the depth, we find very interesting pictures. In the end, I would like to say that I cannot say, let us create a unified ideology and change the attitude towards life. This will not happen. And the time is, this is the time of gathering stones, but this process is not yet over, and each person is choosing his or her way, but at least when you are going out of this hall, you should understand that there is an alternative to life, and that human being is not a waste, and we should not destroy humankind, but we should destroy waste. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Please. I will turn back to China here again, because China is the first, number one in the number of population, and China up to 1949, they had a lot of people who lived in incredible poverty, and they had incredible number of diseases until the end of 1980s. To provide the consumption, China distributed the food cards, and I actually lived with those food cards. At the moment, the population of China has increased dramatically. It was about 1,007,000 people, and now it has doubled, and they have no food cards, and they gather 280 million tons of grain. They also, and today they gather 660 million tons of grain. And the question is easy. Can you comment on how China, how this Chinese experience and their development of economy is helping to increase the population, and why is it coming in another way, in a very unusual way for the common situation in the world? Yes, we can see here, look at it at different points of view. As for the number of people and the food consumption, yes, you were right that it is not easy to feed all the Chinese, and at some time the cup of rice was the only food that was available for average Chinese people, but today all the Chinese are consuming a lot of meat, and today they are higher and they are much healthier because the food is much healthier, and the concept of harmonization is metaphysical, is a philosophical issue, but there is a real grain, and they are going in the right way, and we should not reduce the number of people. And also, there is a problem of harmonization and culture. But what they are lacking, why friendship forever, and Dmitry Mendeleev wrote that as we are having similar mentality. No, we're speaking about demography, we are not speaking about the spiritual practices. This is a subtle moment, but nevertheless the future of China is certainly together with Russia, and there is a scientific proof for that, and confusion moments. A brief question to understand your report. You said that we should not limit the population, but they used to limit population in China, but not now. Yes, their wellness has grown. Is there any natural limit for the Earth in terms of the population? At the moment we have nearly 8 billion, then there will be 10, 12, 20. No, there is no limit. Thank you. Endless. Okay, thank you.
Будущее у Китая, конечно же, вместе с Россией, и обоснование, научное обоснование тому есть.
Dear friends, good morning. It's very nice to see you here in the framework of our Congress. I will speak briefly about my thesis. First of all, is the birthday of Vladimir Putin. He is 68 years old today. It's pretty symbolic. First of all. Second of all, let us look at the development of Russia. The 10th of February 2007. The next speech of Vladimir Putin. 7 years later, there was a coup d'etat in Ukraine, and later on, Barack Obama proudly claimed that he supported this coup d'etat, and he wrote, and the newspapers were writing about that, and this is not a fake, and the third point is that the events in March 2014, when Crimea joined the Russian Federation, and the use of willpower by Vladimir Putin, whether to accept Crimea into the Russian Federation or to reject it, and the consequences of such political decision. As we know, the political consequences were positive, and the consequences were the conscious attacks from the civilized Western. And in February, March, we are expecting the next global event in February, March 2021, in half a year, and there are a lot of comments which you could read in the magazine Human Capital in 2013, including the questions about the time cycles, and it was said that in 1980 there were certain events, and as the previous speaker said, we need to find the point which will match the interests of all the countries and find and go the way of supranational idea, which is the most harmonious. And now about my speech. Everything comes to its end, and there is something new coming after something old. The international life, there has already become the age of wisdom, and as for the reforms in the United Nations and the time cycles in United Nations, the Pythagore school showed big and small forms, and they meant the birth, then formation, the fourth blooming, and then sunset, fall, and transition. First, Fourth Reformation, 1919, there was the League of Nations, there are 4 members, and the major goals were written in the charter. The first cycle, 1919-1926. This is the first big cycle. The second cycle formation, 1926, 1933. It's the beginning of the Russian and United States diplomatic relationship. The bloom in 1933 and 1940. The sunset, fall, and transition, 1940. 1945. Later on, as you know, the United Nations organization was formed, and in 1946 all the actives of the League of Nations were transited to the new organization. So let us look at the time cycles. The formation, the second stage, included birth, 1945, 1952, bloom, 1959, 1965, and the sunset, 1965, 1973, the energetic crisis, the third big cycle, the birth, 1973-1980, formation, 1980-1987, then the bloom, 1987 and 1994, the sunset turning into chaos, 1994-2001. Doesn't it look familiar? In 2000, the United Nations accepted the declaration of the millennium, and the goals are the security. There are 10 changing countries with a vote but without the right of veto, and 5 permanent members. And at the beginning of this century was a crisis for the United Nations, and now let us follow it. The second big stage, 2008, 2015. In 2008 we had crisis. The third stage, the bloom of crisis from 2015 to 2022, and the 4 small crises of the big 4 crisis cycle. The global end of the global crisis will come in 2022 and 2029, and this will mean that we will be transitioning to a new quality level of a new life. And we can, you have all been distributed a booklet, and you can see it there. And what measures can we take here? The pendulum of history encircles swung from west to east, and the international centers which can be created in Russia and in other parts of the eastern hemisphere are being formed now in the years 2020, 21, 2022. During these 3 years, one of the offers is to create a global organization of states and civilizations as an evolution of League of Nations and UN. And this will be an alliance organized in civilization principle, and it will be the main element of the organization of international life. And I fully agree with the previous speakers. And the global society needs an organization which will be able not only to discuss and constatate some facts, but to solve problems. And that's why we need a universal organization of countries and civilization. We need a new structure of so-called global government. It can be called in different ways, and such a structure should have a General Assembly and an enlarged Security Council, which will provide peace all over the world, and it will be constructed of the states which represent all global civilizations, with the use of the right of veto and the possibility to remove it on the initiative of the majority of the security member states. And it should be an institutional structure based on civilization. It's the age of construction, peace, and cooperation in the Eastern Hemisphere. Whether it will be spread to the Western Hemisphere or whether there will be another fight between East and West, only time can show. And to effectively solve a lot of issues, we need a new ideology. This is what I wanted to say. And I wanted to declare 12 principles of the new generation. I have prepared them for the summit. First of all, each person can be reasonable and understand the reason and consequence connections. Second, each person is fully responsible for his emotions, thoughts, and acts, and can have a conscious way of life to realize his dreams. The third, each person is able to be fair to himself and other people in a new polycentral world. Fourth, each person is capable to be happy and to dynamically develop himself in a polycultural society. Each person is able to be involved in the creation of spiritual and creative society. Number 6, each person is able to be proud of his roots and respect the opinion of his neighbors on the planet of Earth. Each person is able to lower the negative impact on the environment and contribute to the improvement of nature. Number 8, each person is able to actively take part in the renaissance of spiritual classical basics of society development. Number 9, each person is able to think and act freely and not to the detriment of others, positively developing human potential. Number 10, each person is capable to make a sound impact on civilization, heritage, and influence the fates of modern and future generations. Number 11, each person is able to reject the obsolete and imposed model world order, divide, set on fight and rule. And the final number 12, each person is capable to become involved in the launch of a new world order, create, unite, and strengthen for the benefit of the whole mankind. And it depends on everyone what kind of system we take, whether it will be united, whether it will be separated, whether it will be creative or destroyed. We are focused on creation, unity, and further development. Thank you very much. I am ready to answer the questions. Thank you. Any questions? I'm coming back to China, as China is a big country. You have just laid out your 12 principles. What do you think about Chinese innovations? The social credit system, which is being actively used not only in China but in some other countries as well. And this is my first question. And the second, if in Chinese hierarchy power there is a commission which is very attentively scrutinizing all the cases of corruption among communists and among anyone else, and how such Chinese innovations can influence your 12 principles. Thank you very much for your question. Each initiative should be aimed for the good if it is implemented in the necessary range. If the initiative is really healthy for the society and if it brings some use and they should be strengthened and they should be present so that a person either through some sweets or through some punishment, could realize that he needs to take part in the development of the society. And any kind of money which is taken from the budget is actually taken from the people. And as soon as we introduce this into our work with the officials, the model of the world will start to develop in a different way. And I can also say that there are several directions of development. For example, Indian model, Russian model, and Chinese models. These are very different, various directions, and if our experts could find out an optimal model which will be universal for everybody, not specifically in Russia or in China or in India, but unified, universal model, and that it could be implemented, it would be very nice. So the details have to be elaborated and they should be implemented for the benefit of the society. About the discipline, any conversation that starts at any level is always interrupted by some pessimists who are saying this will not work with us. But in China, each official knows that he is looked after. And you know that we have created a special department in China who is finding people from China who have constructed some palaces, and they are returned to the country together with the currency which they have taken away from the country. Unfortunately, this is not working with us at the moment, but I think it could be incredibly useful for us. But in China, the majority of money, as far as I know, is taken away through Hong Kong. But there are also different schemes. So your approach is an approach of moral and conceptual, theoretical approach. But what will happen when we will start to... What may happen if people start to implement those 12 principles? And we should certainly structure them. Okay, thank you very much, dear colleagues. The discussion is very interesting, but unfortunately our time, in accordance with the agenda, has finished. Oleg Shevchenko, is he present here? That's me. Could you be as brief as possible? You have a presentation, right?
Можно вообще дальше уйти в библейские принципы, там, ну, собственно говоря, это уже каждый как посмотрит.
И структурировать их, конечно.